Well, hello everyone. Welcome. Thanks for joining me today for this webinar about hiring your first employee. My name's Richard and I'll be walking you through the essentials of employing staff so that you can hire with confidence and set your business up for success. Before we jump into it, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today, and I'd also like to pay my respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are present in the meeting. Today, I'm coming to you from the lands of the Ngunnawal people, who are the traditional custodians of the land here in Canberra. I also recognise any other people or families with connections to the lands of the ACT and region. On the housekeeping front, I'll be mentioning some web addresses and online tools as I go through. Don't worry too much about trying to scramble and jot these down. I will send an email to everyone that's registered for the session with links to all the information that we cover. We are also recording today's session and I'll get it up on our YouTube channel. So for those of you watching on YouTube, you can find the links that we go through today in the video description. So again, you don't need to jot them all down. I won't be answering live questions today because there are some privacy and confidentiality issues with that. But if you do have a question as I'm going through, drop it in the live chat and we'll do our best to point you in the right direction. And by way of disclaimer, the information in this presentation is general in nature. How it applies to you will depend on your individual situation. And for more information, you can visit our website, which is fairwork.gov.au, or you can call us on 13 13 94. For anyone watching from Western Australia, there are different rules that apply to sole traders in WA. So as a starting point, I recommend that you check the information about the WA State Industrial Relations System on the wa.gov.au website. Okay, so we've got all the housekeeping out of the way. Now we can jump into it. I'm going to start by talking a bit about who the Fair Work Ombudsmen are. So look, most people that I speak to have heard of Fair Work, but often they're not completely sure who we are or what we do. So that's where I want to start and briefly cover that off. We are the Fair Work Ombudsman. We're an Australian government agency that helps employers and employees understand and comply with the workplace rights and obligations that come from a piece of legislation called the Fair Work Act. What this means in practical terms is that we can help with questions about pay, leave, hours of work, ending employment, and other entitlements. We also help employers and employees to resolve disputes that they're having in the workplace. And in some cases, we do enforce compliance through enforcement tools. So things like infringement notices, which is another way of saying fines, compliance notices, and in some serious cases, we can also take court action. Now, we place a really strong focus on helping small businesses understand and comply with their employment obligations. And we have got a range of free services, tools, templates, fact sheets, and information to help you do just that. Look, from our perspective, this is particularly important. Putting systems in place up front and getting things right from the start, it can really save a lot of time and headaches down the track. We want to support you guys to be able to do this. So we do have a range of services and we really encourage you to get in contact with us if you have any questions, because we do want to help out. We do offer free services, so please don't hesitate or think that you can't come to us for that support. So look, with all that in mind, let's turn to hiring your first employee. So when you're starting to consider expanding your business and putting on your first employee, the first thing you need to do is really plan that rollout. So things, they often move pretty quickly, or it might not be particularly clear when you're scaling up exactly what the employee will be doing or what you need. But doing that, thinking carefully about what your business needs are and how the role that you plan on hiring will help meet your business goals is just going to make sure that you're getting the right person in to do the right job and it'll hopefully increase your productivity and your profitability of your business. So the types of things that you need to think about up front are the tasks that the employee will be doing or the problem that you need them to solve, whether there are any particular skills or qualifications that they need to have, how busy you think the job's going to be, and how long you think you're going to need someone for. Once you've got an idea and a bit of a picture in your head about all of this, then you can start to think about what type of an employee you're going to need. There are a few different options. So the three most common types of employee that you've probably heard about: full-time employees, part-time employees, and casuals. There are also fixed-term employees and apprentices and trainees that you may want to consider. Now, each group has different rules and entitlements, so I thought it'd be a good place to start by looking and talking a bit about what each of the different types of employees are. So let's look at full-time employees first. Full-time employees are hired on an ongoing basis. Basically, this means that they have guaranteed hours every week, and it's usually around 38 hours. As they work, they build up paid annual leave and personal or sick leave hours that they can then take when they need to. Under the National Employment Standards, which set a lot of basic entitlements for people in the Fair Work system, there are also a range of other leave entitlements they get. Things like unpaid parental leave, compassionate leave, and also paid family and domestic violence leave, which is something I'll cover off in a little bit more detail a bit later on. They also get paid for any public holidays that fall on a day they'd usually work. And if you want to end a full-time employee's employment, you need to give them written notice or payment instead of notice. And now the amount of notice they get depends on how long they've been employed with you. Turning to part-time employees are basically the same as full-time in that they're guaranteed regular hours of work, they get paid annual leave, paid sick leave, and they get notice when their employment ends. The main difference is that they work less hours than a full-timer, and their leave accumulates based on their reduced number of hours that they're working. So if you've scoped your role and there's going to be consistent and ongoing work, it's worth considering whether you bring someone on in a full or part-time capacity. Again, when you're scaling up, it can be hard to know how busy you'll be or how quickly you'll see growth. If you don't want to commit to an ongoing employee to begin with, there are some other options. So rather than hiring a full-time or part-time employee on an ongoing basis, you can actually engage them under a fixed-term contract. Under these arrangements, you can set a period of time, up to 2 years, that the person will be hired for. They'll get the same entitlements to regular hours and leave that a full-time or part-timer will, but once that fixed term finishes, their employment will end. So this can be an option if you want the regular stability of a full or part-time worker, but you aren't certain about the long-term future of a role. But it's worth mentioning there are limits to extending fixed-term contracts. Generally, an employee on a fixed-term contract can't have the fixed term extended more than once or be on a fixed term for more than 2 years. So once you hit those types of milestones, you would need to offer ongoing employment if you wanted to keep them around. There are some exceptions to these fixed term limits and these fixed term rules, and you can find more information about them on the website if that's an option that you're considering. The other main type of employee is a casual. Casuals have no firm advance commitment to ongoing work. They aren't guaranteed regular hours every week, and their entitlements are slightly different to full-timers and part-timers. So casuals are usually paid a higher casual pay rate, and their leave entitlements are a bit different. They aren't entitled to some of the paid leave types that full-timers get, so they don't get paid annual leave or paid sick leave, and they also don't get paid days off on public holidays that they don't actually work. But there are still some forms of leave, as you can see on the slide, that casuals are entitled to. And one type of leave that casuals do get is paid family and domestic violence leave. So any employee in the Fair Work system, including casuals, that's experiencing family or domestic violence is entitled to take up to 10 days of paid leave per year to deal with the impacts of family and domestic violence. So this might be leave to take time off for things like making arrangements for their safety, attending court hearings, or accessing police services. It's particularly important type of leave to be aware of, and we've got a guide to help employers have conversations about paid family and domestic violence leave that I would encourage you all to look at. I think it's really important that people understand this entitlement before an employee comes to them and asks. If that happens, you want to be in a position where you can know what how to speak about it and what an employee's rights and entitlements are and how to deal with that situation as an employer in a compassionate and effective way. So I really encourage everyone to check out that guide before an employee actually comes to you. So if you're not sure of the hours that you'll need an employee to work each week or whether it's reasonably likely there will be future work available, casual employment might be an option to consider as there is a bit more flexibility there. Worth noting again, casuals do have a pathway to permanent employment. So if they've been working for a small business for at least 12 months and believe that they no longer meet the definition of being a casual employee, they may write to you of their intention to change to permanent employment. It's one to be aware of. If it comes up down the track, an employee writes, do check out the information on our website about that pathway to permanent employment. You do have some obligations when that happens. So if you get to that point, check out our website again. Now, the last type of employment I want to briefly mention are apprentices and trainees. If you're considering taking one of these on, I would encourage you to get in contact with your state or territory training authority because you do need to enter into a formal training contract with them. Sometimes we see people paying apprentice or traineeship wages without a formal training contract. This isn't on. You need to get that formal contract in place. So the other thing that we do see coming up is businesses engaging people under their own ABN numbers and treating them as independent contractors rather than employees. So independent contractors provide services for another business or person instead of being employed by them. Contractors usually negotiate their own fees and working arrangements and can work for more than one client at a time. If you're considering engaging someone as a contractor, I would recommend that you get some advice. I'm not going to go into the detail today, but there is a legal test to determine whether someone's a contractor or an employee, and that test looks at a range of different factors that need to be considered. I'll include a link in the follow-up email where you can find more information if you are considering going down that path, but it is one to tread a little bit cautiously through. So now you've scoped the role that you want for your business and you've decided on the type of employee that's going to work best for your situation. The next step, again, really important planning step, is to do the maths on how much the role and the job is going to cost. You do need to make sure that you're going to be able to afford taking an employee on. I know there's a million things calling for attention when you're looking after your own business and every minute that you have is precious, but taking the time to properly understand the costs associated with hiring is going to help you make an informed decision and avoid hidden issues down the track. Bringing on employees is a pretty serious thing and you need to go into it with your eyes open. So how do you do that? How do you check the costs involved with employment? Well, most employees are covered by a thing called an award. Basically, awards are rule books that set the pay and conditions for a particular industry or job. They cover things like minimum pay rates, overtime, penalty rates and allowances, as well as non-monetary entitlements, things like hours of work, the rules about rostering, and the rules about when employees are entitled to take breaks. We have got a pay calculator That will step you through and help you find the award that applies to your business and calculate the pay rates, the allowances, overtime rates, and penalties that you'll need to pay to your employee. So when you're looking at this, I'd encourage you to consider what a typical roster for that employee might look like. You really need to map out the days an employee is going to work, the times, and the hours, and then go through and use our pay calculator to check what their normal hourly rate would be, whether they'd be working any hours that get penalty rates. So if they're working on late nights, early mornings, or weekends, they might be entitled to higher rates of pay. Whether they'd be getting any overtime pay for working above the kind of ordinary set hours, and whether there are any other allowances that you need to pay. So often awards will have allowances for things like needing to have a first aid certificate, using your own tools, having to launder your own uniform. So the pay calculator can help you check all of those different monetary obligations that you'd be needing to pay. If you'd like some extra help to understand award entitlements, we do have a free employer advisory service that provides tailored written advice to small businesses. So basically you can talk to them about your business and they will help you find the right award and then go through any entitlements that you'd like help with, and they can put all that in writing so you've got something you can refer back to. Beyond your award obligations, there are a few other financial considerations to be aware of. So most employees are entitled to be paid superannuation on top of their wages. The Australian Taxation Office, the ATO, is your best port of call for the specifics about who the superannuation guarantee applies to and how much you need to pay. But for most, it's currently sitting at around 12% superannuation that needs to be paid. Depending on your circumstances, you may also have to pay things like payroll tax if the total wages you pay are above a certain limit. What that limit is, and then the tax rate is different in each state and territory, so you'll need to check yours. And in some cases, you may need to pay fringe benefits tax if you give your employees benefits other than salary or wages. So like if you're giving them a car that they can use for private purposes. You must, you should also need to have workers' compensation insurance, and you should also consider public liability insurance. If you're not already aware of business.gov.au, I would encourage you to check out that website as well. It's a free government website and it's got a wealth of information. And that includes a guide to hiring employees that will help you understand these different aspects in more detail and point you in the right direction of where you can find more information. So once you've done your sums, you've done your planning, you've scoped out the role, if it all checks out, the next step is time to start the recruitment process. I know this morning I've been plugging a lot of government tools and resources. But this is where our suite of employment templates comes in handy. We've got a bunch of documents that you can use to help you with recruitment. The first one is our job description template. So once you've made the decision to hire, you can take that thinking you did around what you want the employee to be doing, the skills and qualifications you're looking for, and put it into the job description. So the job description is the document that potential applicants are going to read to understand what you're looking for, and it can help you clarify with them what you're looking for from the role. Once you've got your job description, you need to advertise the job, and yes, we've got a job ad template that you can use to help you write your job ad as well. If you're including a pay rate in the job ad, make sure that it's at least the award rate, because it is unlawful to advertise a job with a rate below the legal minimum rate for that particular job. And a quick note to reiterate, discrimination in the workplace is against the law, and this includes discriminating against applicants during the hiring and recruitment process. So you mustn't discriminate against job applicants because of their race, colour, national extraction, like their place of birth or ancestry, their social origin, like their class, their caste, or their socio-occupational category, their sex, gender identity, intersex status, sexual orientation, experience of family and domestic violence, age, physical or mental disability, marital status, family or carer's responsibility, pregnancy, breastfeeding, religion, political opinion, or their industrial activities. So things like belonging to a trade union. Now, after your job ad goes out, it's a matter of shortlisting the applicants, interviewing, and choosing the best one. I always recommend that you do a reference check before offering someone a job. We've got a reference checking form that goes through the process and has some questions that we would suggest you ask referees. Once you've selected your preferred candidate, done any other checks of their licenses, qualifications, or their legal work status, then it's time to make them a job offer. It's a good idea to create an employment contract or letter of offer. A good contract, it can protect your business and your staff. If you're not sure about what to include, business.gov.au, it actually has a tool that you can use and will help you build out an employment contract. So remember, your employment contract can't have any terms that are less favourable than the National Employment Standards and the award that the employee is hired under. After all that, hopefully the candidate accepts the offer and you can begin the onboarding and induction process. If they don't accept the offer, I guess go back to your short list and try again. When day one does roll around, your induction really sets the scene and will help ensure things get off to a good start. Scheduling your new hire to start on a day when you've got time to devote to them, it makes a big difference. Use this time to communicate your expectations and give them an opportunity to ask questions. It's going to help them feel informed, welcome, and prepared to do their job. Make sure they know where things like the toilet and kitchen are, where they can store any personal belongings. These might seem like little things, but they do help make people feel more comfortable. There are also a couple of formal requirements when someone starts. So all new employees need to be given a copy of the Fair Work Information Statement before they start or as soon as possible after they start. So the Fair Work Information Statement, it's basically a document explaining an employee's minimum conditions of employment, and it goes through things like the National Employment Standards. If you've hired someone on a fixed term contract, you also need to give them a copy of the fixed term contract information statement as well as the Fair Work Information Statement. Similar type of thing, but it goes through the rules and entitlements around fixed term contracting. And if you're hiring a casual, they need to be given a copy of the Casual Employment Information Statement as well as the Fair Work Information Statement. And it, as you probably guessed, goes through the casual specific entitlements and also that casual pathway to permanent employment. So you can find all of these information statements on our website. And I would encourage you, every time you're putting an employee on, is to go back to our website and download the information statement directly from there. They do change from time to time, so that'll just making sure that you've got the most recent version. If your employee is covered by an award, and most are, you do also need to make the award easily available to them. So you can provide them a digital version or a hard copy. For example, you can put in a prominent place like in the kitchen, or if you've got a notice board at work. You should also tell your employee the award that they're covered by and what their classification and role is under the award. This will just make sure everyone's on the same page and should get around any misunderstandings. If you've hired full or part-time employees, most awards say that you need to agree on their usual hours of work and their rostering arrangements in advance. And it's important to record these arrangements in writing. And we've got some templates, surprise, surprise, that you can use to do this. The award might also have other rules, like how much notice you need to give an employee if you change their roster or hours, so check that out. Awards also for casual employees, if you're hiring a casual, most awards set a minimum shift length or a minimum payment for each time in a casual's coming in. So normally you can't just pull in a casual for 20 minutes. They normally have, it's normally a couple of hours that they need to be called in for or paid for each shift. So check yours out for that one. You'll also have tax and superannuation and work health and safety obligations to sort out. Business.gov.au, that hiring checklist I mentioned earlier, will give you all the details about what you need to do there. So employees have a legal right to disconnect from the workplace. This means they don't have to monitor, read, or respond to work-related communications outside their working hours unless doing so is unreasonable. This doesn't mean that an employer is barred from contacting an employee outside work hours. What it means is that an employee doesn't have to monitor, read, or respond to contact if it's not reasonable. What's reasonable? I hear you all asking. It's going to come down to a range of factors. So the things to consider include the reason for the contact, the employee's role and their level of responsibility, whether they're compensated for being on call or working extra hours, and the employee's personal circumstances, including any family or caring responsibilities that they might have. So you should discuss the possibility of out-of-hours contact with your employee early on and set expectations that work for both of you. It's a good way to avoid any misunderstandings, and it just makes sure, again, that you're both on the same page about these things. If you anticipate that there might be a need for out-of-hours contact, I would encourage you to check out our small business focused videos that go through the right to disconnect. There's also a video about kind of how to have that conversation. So yes, if you do think you might need to be calling employees in for out-of-hours stuff, check those videos out. There'll be a link in your email or in the YouTube description. We do also have some record keeping requirements that need to be mentioned. So you have an obligation to keep time and wage records for 7 years. They need to be legible, they need to be in English, and they need to be readily accessible to a Fair Work inspector. I'll send a link to the full list of records that need to be kept, but there's a few key categories. So you need to keep general records about who you're employing and how they're employed. Things like the employee's name, the ABN and employing entity they're employed by, and whether they're full-time, part-time or casual. You also need to keep information about how much an employee's paid and the hours of work. You need to keep records about how much leave an employee has accrued and how much leave an employee's taken. You need to keep some records about superannuation contributions. And also when employment ends, there are some details and some records you need to keep about ending employment also. There are a few others that I haven't covered. So once you're at the point of getting an employee on board, do check out the full list of what you need to keep records on that's on our website. And do you know what? We've got some record keeping templates as well that you can use to help you do that. So you'll find all of that on our website. Time and wage records, they're private and confidential. Only an employer, payroll staff and authorised individuals like accountants can access them. If an employee asks to see their records, you also need to make them available to the employee. And this is the case even after an employee has ceased employment. They still retain a right to have access to their records. Fair Work inspectors can also ask for time and wage records to find out what an employee is entitled to and whether they've been paid correctly. Time and wage records shouldn't be changed unless the change is to correct an error, and they should definitely not be false or misleading. So there are offences under the Fair Work Act for false or misleading records. The other important piece of paperwork to touch on is payslips. So employees need to be given a payslip within 1 working day of payday. They can be given hard copy or electronically, and there are specific rules about what needs to be included on them. When you get to that point of paying your employee for the first time, make sure you check out our website. We've got the full details, and you know what? We've got a template payslip there as well that you can use. So, look, as we're approaching the end of today's session, I'm really conscious that there is quite a bit to get your head around as a first-time employer, but there are a lot of supports available. I always say, look, take it one step at a time and do your research as you progress through the process. So, start at the beginning that we talked about and just step yourself through it all. We've got a dedicated small business website that breaks down all the information that I've covered today. And I'll also send out that follow-up email with links to our employer advisory service, pay calculator, the templates, our fact sheets, and detailed information about all the topics that we've covered. So you'll have that as a resource and a reference point to go to. If you'd like to learn more about the free tools and resources that we have, we actually ran a separate webinar early in the year that went through them in more detail. So I'll stick a link to that in the follow-up email. And you can also find it on our YouTube channel, which is Fair Work Gov AU. And I'll give another plug to the business.gov.au guide to hiring employees. It's a step-by-step checklist, and it brings together all the key things that you need to consider across jurisdictions, so across tax, fair work, work health and safety. So it kind of covers it all and can point you off to the relevant people and the relevant information. If you'd prefer to speak to someone, there are also a range of organisations that can help you. So you can come to us. As I mentioned, our employer advisory service is a free way to get written advice about your obligations under the Fair Work system. Among other things, they can help you with award coverage and understanding pay rates and entitlements. We also have a small business helpline that you can call on 13 13 94 for advice as well. There are also a range of small business and industry-based employer organisations that you can get help from. Employer organisations are registered organisations that represent the interests of their employer members within a specific industry or sector, and that includes in matters relating to workplace relations. So employer organisations can offer a range of services, including access to workplace information, support and advice, as well as legal representation. There can be costs associated with accessing these services like membership fees. And if you're already a member of an industry or small business association, you might already have access to specialist workplace relations advisors. In a similar vein, unions are also registered organisations that represent and help employees. So once you're an engaged employee, if they've got any questions, they can be referred to their relevant union or, of course, to us, the Fair Work Ombudsman, for help and advice. The Fair Work Commission website has a list of registered organisations, including employer associations, on their website if you want to look them up in more detail. Well, that's it for today's webinar. I do hope it's been useful and you found something that you can take away from today's session. And I do wish you all the best and success as you're looking to scale up your small business. If you have any further questions or you'd like to keep in touch with us, you can visit our website and subscribe to our email updates. Contact our info line on 13 30 94. We also offer a translating and interpreting service if you call 1314 50. You can also follow us on our social channels. We do regularly deliver webinars on a range of topics. So if you're interested, you can find a list of upcoming webinars at fairwork.gov.au/webinars, and you can watch past webinars on our YouTube channel or through our website. And after the webinar ends, there's going to be a quick survey pop up. I would appreciate it if you could answer a few questions and stick around and do that just to help us. It just helps us kind of develop and, make sure we're doing the right thing in our webinar program. Should only take a couple of minutes to complete, and I do really value that feedback. So look, thank you again for joining us today. Good luck, and I hope to see you at a future webinar.